Good afternoon, and welcome to this live debate among the candidates for New York's 19th Congressional District, first-term Republican John Faso, Democrat Antonio Delgado, Independent Diane Neal, and Green Party candidate Stephen Greenfield. I'm Alan Chartock. Joining me on the panel are Jim Cambrick of NY-19 News, Channel 13, and Allison Dunn, WAMC's Hudson Valley Bureau Chief, and WAMC News Director Ian Pickus, who is our official timekeeper. Before I cover the ground rules, I'd like to thank our television partners, WNYT, News Channel 13, for working with us today. Today's debate is being held at the Linda in Albany. The audience here has agreed to hold its applause until the end of the debate. Each candidate will be allotted a 2-minute opening statement and a 2-minute closing statement. Questions will be asked in rotating alphabetical order. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer each question. If we feel that a response merits a short rebuttal, we may choose to award 30 seconds. So now for the opening statements. First, Antonio Delgado.
Thank you, Alan. It is a pleasure to be here. I want to acknowledge my fellow candidates on the stage. I'm running because for a very long time now, the folks in D.C. Have not given enough thought to working families and everyday Americans, like the family I grew up in right here in Schenectady. My parents worked for GE for many years, and we were able to live a story of upward mobility that I think has abandoned too many folks, no matter how hard they work today. We used to be #1 in the world in upward mobility, and now we are dead last in the Western world. 80% of folks are sharing just 10% of the wealth. 2/3 of people are living paycheck to paycheck. And the answers that we get are to rip health care away from those who need it most for a tax break to a wealthy few, or to pass a tax bill that adds $1.5 trillion to our deficit on the backs of working and middle-class Americans. And when I try to figure out why this is the case, I think a lot has to do with the fact that we keep sending folks to D.C. who are backed by corporate PACs and special interests and therefore compromised and no longer prioritizing working families. And they've used the language of divisiveness and partisanship to distract us away from that reality. So what do we need? I think we need some new voices. I think we can stop with the career politicians and the lobbyists. I think it's important that we have folks who care about people, who understand the value of opportunity, who understand the value of a public education, who have a diverse set of experiences and have not made a career exploiting fear and anxiety, but actually care about progress for everybody, no matter your race, your class, your gender. I can do that work. I grew up here in Schenectady, working class family, went on to Colgate, earned a Rhodes Scholarship, got my law degree, met my wife there who grew up in Woodstock, just an hour away, spent time in the music space, then as a litigator in the commercial space, diverse experiences where I've come across all folks of life. And I'm excited to do that work now in D.C. Thank you.
John Faso.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Congressman John Faso, and I ask for your support 2 weeks from tomorrow on Election Day. I'm running on my record and my 35 years of service, of living and working, raising a family here in the 19th Congressional District. These are partisan, polarized times in America, and what I've done since I took office in January of 2017, I've worked consciously to work across party lines to get things done. In fact, I'm proud to say that I rank 18th out of 435 members of Congress in terms of being most bipartisan. And what does that mean? It means that I was able to lead a legislative effort to combat one of the most important problems that we face, not only here in upstate New York, but across America, the crisis of opioid addiction. My legislation, the STOP Act, is incorporated in a major piece of opioid and legislation that will be signed into law this week by President Trump. That legislation, I had 275 Democrat and Republican co-sponsors. That legislation will stem the flow of illegal substances like fentanyl shipped into our country through the U.S. mail from places like China. I've also worked hard for our dairy farmers in this district. We've achieved improvements in payments to dairy farmers who are suffering under a long-sustained economic pressure. We've also worked with the Trump administration to change the confiscatory tariffs and discriminatory tariffs against our agricultural products. So there are many issues we can discuss. And I'm proud of the fact that we are now growing this economy at over 4%. We have more job openings in America than we have unemployed people. And I'm going to continue, if honored with the opportunity to serve again, I'm going to continue my bipartisan efforts to move our country and our district forward. Thank you so much.
Stephen Greenfield.
Hi, thanks very much. My name is Steve Greenfield. I'm from New Paltz, New York, living there for almost 18 years. And I have previously served 2 terms on the New Paltz School District Board of Education. I have been serving for almost 15 years in the New Paltz Volunteer Fire Department, where I also represent them at the Ulster County Volunteer Fire Association in a legislative action capacity. And let me tell you a little bit about why I decided to run for this race, even though it's not traditionally expected that somebody in my position is going to win. First and foremost, I was really incensed when I saw the platforms of the major party candidates that were running, and the words war and peace and poverty did not appear anywhere on any of those platforms, and still do not appear even right here on this podium today, that we're talking about middle-class people, working people. We have 44 million Americans in this country living below the poverty line, another 50 million living just at it, and nobody is speaking to them. Nobody is speaking to the question of wages, which have not grown relative to inflation in the last 40 years and contracted to 1/3 of the part of GDP that they were 40 years ago. I majored in economics in college. I think we have enough corporate lawyers in Congress and in all the halls of government today, and I think people claim to vote on their pocketbook issues, and if that's really the case, then maybe voting for someone whose training is in economics is the way to go for at least 1 seat in Congress this year. We are not being serious about pretending we care about lowering taxes if we're not lowering the $1.5 trillion we're spending fighting wars. We're not serious about lowering crime and drug abuse and improving education unless we're lowering the rate of poverty, because the cost of not lowering them is much more expensive than the cost of addressing them. I also want to talk about climate change, because both parties are science deniers when it comes to the timeline that we have available to act. And most importantly, I'm kind of hard to believe that people come here to talk about people getting too much corporate money when they're here themselves on about $7 million of corporate money. So let's be serious about these things.
Diane Neal.
Thank you guys so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it, really. Unlike Antonio and John and even Steve, I'm not a polished politician. I am not a lobbyist. I am not a lawyer. I was not created by committee in some dark room in D.C. by power brokers. Really, all I am is a resident of New York 19. I'm your friend. I'm your neighbor. And I wanted to run because I saw how desperately we needed an advocate. The big corporations, the big parties, the big money, all of those people, they have a lot of advocates in D.C. They got a lot of people fighting for them. We don't. And a lot of people are suffering because of it. And the thing about New York 19 is it's really unique. We're self-sufficient, we're resilient, we're independent-minded people. Even our biggest voting bloc, they're unaffiliated voters, because that's who we are. We don't buy into all this divisive stuff. We decide who's best, and that's who we vote for. We don't like the divisions. We don't like any of it, the hysteria. It doesn't help anything, and it doesn't help us. And in this life of a wide variety of experiences, I have learned that everyone believes what they do for a reason, and to them it is very important. But when we're fighting among each other and ourselves, we can't ever figure out what that reason is to work on a solution, but that's not a problem that we have. We are okay speaking to each other, listening to each other, talking to each other, to work on solutions, things that are best for us, not just things that are best for big corporations thousands of miles away. All we want are the same things. We want opportunities and the resources to carry out our full potential. And what we need more than anything is someone in D.C. to fight for those resources and opportunities, to fight for us, to advocate for us. And I honestly believe if there's any group of people that can do it, New York 19, it's us. Thank you.
Our first question goes to Antonio Delgado. Your opponents have frequently referred to you as being from outside the 19th House District, have criticized your campaign for busing in volunteers from New York City. What should voters know about your background and your ties to the district?
Yes, I so appreciate that question. I'm born and raised and spent the first 18 years of my life in Schenectady. My parents worked for GE for many years, and we, like I noted earlier, lived a story of upward mobility that for a lot of folks in upstate New York has gone by the wayside. My wife grew up an hour away from me in Woodstock. Her parents, small business owners for 40-plus years. In fact, her mother is the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Saugerties. We got, I should say, I proposed to my wife at the Ship to Shore in Kingston. I got married to my wife at the Catterskill in Greene County. All of these are in upstate and in the district. And we left, yes, after we graduated from high school and pursued some opportunities. And I think that was right around the time Congressman Faso came into the picture from Long Island. And, you know, he speaks a lot about the brain drain and how young people have to go off and find opportunities. And it's interesting because while we've been gone, he's been, I think, doing wrong by working folks. The fact of the matter is, he's voted 21 times no in the state assemblyman for equal pay for equal work, decided that it was appropriate to defund Planned Parenthood, decided to vote for a tax bill that rolls back working and middle-class folks' protections, votes for a health care bill that rips protections from millions of folks across this country, was a lobbyist for a good 10 years and got dinged for pay-to-play violations. And it seems to me that we need to actually put people in Congress who care about the folks here.
Same question basically to Congressman John Faso. John, what should voters know about your background and your ties to the district?
Well, as I mentioned in my open, Alan, Mary Frances and I moved to Kinderhook in Columbia County in 1983. I ran for the New York State Assembly in 1986. We have lived here and worked here for these 35 years, raised our children here, sent them to local public schools when they were in grammar school. And the fact of the matter is, and also my wife worked for 22 years at as a school nurse at our local high school. I served in the state legislature for many years and worked in the public sector and in the private sector. And 2 years ago, I was fortunate enough and honored to serve in Congress. Now, contrast that with the attack you just heard on me from my opponent. It is true he grew up in Schenectady, and Schenectady is a fine place. But he spent his entire adult life outside of this area and outside of this region. In fact, he moved to Rhinebeck in 2017, bought a house, registered to vote, and the very next day, he filed to run for Congress. He's never lived or worked in this district, been involved in any philanthropic, charitable, civic engagements in this district. And that really, I think, it's shown by the fact that he brings up caravans of busloads of people from the city. His money comes from outside the district. And this attack on me, really, I think people see through that. People know me. I've won election in this district, and I've served the people all throughout this district, and I hope I'm honored to serve again.
Stephen Greenfield, same question.
Very good. I moved here, January will be 18 years since I moved to New Paltz. I got involved by appointment of the town supervisor rather early on, living here in public affairs when I was asked to serve on a new startup they were doing to do research. It was called the Transportation and Land Use Committee. It was my introduction to public service in New Paltz. Shortly thereafter, I stepped forward to volunteer for the fire department, although I was 42 years old at the time. And found myself a good home there and learned to protect my community. I've been in the neighborhood of 3,000 fire calls since I joined the department. When you see those wildfires burning up in Minnewaska Park, that's due to the effects of climate change. I'm not just here to talk to you about what we need to do to prevent that. I'm up there on that mountain in the middle of that fire. That's where I've always been and where I'll continue to be. I got involved in public education, and I was asked to run for school board in New Paltz in 2008, which I did. I served 2 terms there. We made a lot of progress in the district. We were leaders in the state on the anti-testing movement. Did very active work in removing corrupt public officials from some positions in New Paltz. I continue to serve in these areas. And so I am here basically running as somebody who came here and didn't take the classic New York City position of just enjoying the lifestyle and the beautiful views, but got involved in community service very early on, have legislated for 6 years, protected the district for the school children that are there, and will continue to do so.
Thank you.
Diane Neal?
Forgive me, everyone.
Of course.
at the tail end of a very exciting cold that I'm sure many of you have had. Sorry, something I didn't know about campaigns. It just kind of circles around everybody, so forgive me. Same question?
Same question.
All right, thank you for asking, because this is one of my favorite places in the world. I grew up in Littleton, Colorado, which is very, very similar to most of New York 19. And when I moved to the city when I was a teenager, I would start coming up here all the time because I'm a fly fisher woman. And this is the birthplace of all good things fly fishing. So hop on the Peter Pan or the Trailways bus, come up on the weekends, and it was delightful. And when you're young and you're poor and you don't have a lot of money, you crash where you can, stay where you can. And eventually I was lucky enough to get a house here. And so I can't believe it's been like 5 years. 5 years ago now, I was hit by an uninsured drunk driver, and my spine was fractured in quite a few places. And so you have to stop working. And if you're going to be doing a lot of physical therapy, Nina Silverman in Kingston, in case anyone's wondering, she's very good, you just come and hang out. And so this is my only home for years now. Before I ever thought about running for Congress, before I ever thought I would ever do anything like this, I was here full time, just living and learning about everyone and talking to my neighbors, who I love incredibly. So this is my home, and this is where I want to be forever. I don't pine for higher office. I just want to go advocate for my friends and my neighbors and then come home.
Time.
Our second question goes to Congressman Faso. Congressman, you have faced criticism in this campaign for voting for the American Health Care Act, which would have replaced the Affordable Care Act. What specifically is your vision for America's health care system?
Jim, thank you for that question. The problem with the Affordable Care Act is that while it works for some people, it also doesn't work for many others. And we've seen consistent spikes in premiums and deductibles. What good is insurance if you have a deductible of $8,000? So what we need to do is address the deficiencies of the Affordable Care Act while protecting the things and keeping the things that work. As I said in 2016, keep what works and fix what doesn't. What works is the protection for people with pre-existing condition, the concept of keeping your adult children up to age 26 on your health plan, and also the notion that we will try to create, through exchanges, the opportunity for people to shop for a variety of alternatives for health insurance. The problem is, instead of focusing on the 40 million people who did not have insurance, the Affordable Care Act changed the insurance paradigm for everyone else as well. And now that the Democrats have, and Mr. Delgado in particular, have distorted my position, they're trying to obscure what they want to do, which is a single-payer, Medicare for all, government-run system. That would make illegal employer-provided health care. It would double our income taxes, create $32 trillion in new spending, and if you think health care is expensive now, wait till it's free. They do not have an alternative. I've worked on a bipartisan basis to create alternatives, and that's what we will pursue if I'm honored with re-election to Congress. Thank you.
The same question now to Mr. Greenfield.
Thanks very much. You know, the lack of anybody in this race advocating for Medicare for all was one of the biggest drivers of why I decided to enter this race in the first place. I continue to be concerned that positions about this of other candidates are being misrepresented. Mr. Delgado most certainly does not support the Medicare for all system. He's supporting some kind of transitional system that would unfortunately be the most expensive of all possible options. The option that Mr. Faso discusses would also be an incredible increase in cost and also not serve nearly as many people. People talk about the ethics of making sure that full health care can be available to 100% of Americans, and of course Medicare for all is the only system that can assure that, and it's certainly worth supporting on that basis alone. But I like to talk about it in terms of dollars and cents. If you live in New York State, 15 to 20% of your property taxes right now is going to public employee health insurance on the private market, and both of their plans would continue that and continue to drive their costs up and challenge the 2% tax cap and force the firing of teachers. If you're a producer, 20% of your product cost is made up by your health care costs for your employees, and that's why our products are not competitive on the global market anymore. The world has moved on. We need to insure everybody. We need to insure them at an affordable cost for our businesses and our property taxpayers alike, and we need to get started on that right away. No more delays. Single payer, Medicare for all.
Thank you.
Same question, Diane Neal.
Thanks for asking. See, there are a lot of falsities that go around when it comes to like single payer, universal health care, or Medicaid for all. And there's one basic thing that you can say, and it's really easy to say when you're not taking money for any of these companies. Basically, healthcare should not be a for-profit industry in many ways. It does not make sense. And people that profit off of illness and death should not be involved in the decision-making process as to whether or not we have healthcare. It doesn't make any sense. I'm not a big fan of Medicare for all, although it's more efficient than most private healthcare insurances. But there's a way that we can do this. And again, this is going to take people that aren't bought, that aren't paid for, that can just tell the truth. They can sell it in a truthful way to both sides. Because whether you believe it's a moral issue for everyone to be able to have health coverage, which I do, it's also a very fiscally conservative issue. It's not really going to raise the budget that much if you do it the right way and you're not subsidizing these giant industries, again, that profit off of our death. So small businesses, right? They have so much trouble providing health care. It costs so much money. They limit the amount of employees they have, right? So they don't have to go over the threshold. You make sure that we can provide that, they can expand their businesses. People's hours aren't being held at a lower amount, so they can't get those benefits. They have more discretionary income, more spending that they can pump back into the community, and we're spending all this money on it anyway. We subsidize everyone that works at Walmart's health care. We subsidize almost everyone's health care. We streamline it. We take out the people that are profiting from us being ill. It's a system that appeals to both conservatives fiscally, and it appeals to people on a moral level as well. And when we both agree on it, that's the only way we're going to get it done.
Time. Thank you. Mr. Delgado.
Yes, I'd like to point out how profoundly dishonest Congressman Faso's characterization of my healthcare position is, and it's been pretty much laid to bear by the fact that we have individuals on this stage who've made it clear. It speaks a lot about how one is not willing to just have a true debate on what I have been advocating now for over a year and a half on a very consistent basis. We don't have time for games here. We don't have time for misleading people. People are dying, and they want answers, and they want answers now. And I want to pass a public option now. I want to make sure that we are no longer the only developed country in the world without some form of universal health care. A public option will do that. It'll drive down premiums, it'll drive down deductibles, it'll free up the cost for small business owners that have to apply employer-based insurance, and it'll also free up employees who oftentimes feel trapped where they work because of a fear that they might lose the care that they want or they're currently receiving. The other piece to this to drive down costs that I think is absolutely critical is to make sure that Medicare has negotiating power with Big Pharma. Again, keep in mind, Congressman Faso never utters these words. He never says Medicare should have negotiating power with Big Pharma, and yet we all know that would go a long way in cutting down these costs. Why not? Is it because he takes thousands and thousands of dollars of corporate PAC money from Big Pharma? I submit to you, yes. We can't have the games here. We can't mislead about our respective positions. I've been clear on my position for a very long time. Let's just have a real debate on the facts.
Right now I'm going to address Steve Greenfield with this third question. Your platform includes cutting $1.5 trillion in military spending and, quote, avoiding international hostilities. How would you practically accomplish either of these goals if elected?
Okay, first of all, I'm not proposing cutting $1.5 trillion. I have explained that $1.5 trillion is the actual size of our current military budget. And it's really important that we acknowledge that because our discussion about military spending is drastically skewed by this $700 billion figure that people toss out. But that figure is only the Pentagon budget and does not include that our nuclear arsenal is under the Department of Energy, our international weapons transfers programs are in the Department of State, and that the legacy costs of operating at $200 billion a year is in the Veterans Administration, and that the entire Homeland Security Department is part of the defense budget. So we have a budget of $1.5 trillion. Okay, the majority of that budget is a capital budget and exists because of, the bases we have in about 80 countries and the active war operations that we have going on in 3 major theaters and about a dozen more minor theaters. So the first thing that I would do to bring that under control is to just stop starting wars. Okay? We are not a peaceful nation. We start more wars than all other nations in the world combined. Our military budget is more than the next 8 largest military budgets combined, and 6 of those countries are our closest allies. Military spending is the most inflationary form of spending a government can enact other than simply printing money and handing it out to people. And that, in turn, forces us to use inflationary suppressing interest rates and things like that. Sorry. So, yeah, we're going to stop starting wars.
Diane Neal, similar question. Do you favor more or less military spending over our current defense budget?
Well, the interesting thing about military spending is it can be done in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, we need to be secure, we need to be safe, but there are a lot of things in our military spending that don't make any sense. So we have hyper expensive, obsolete equipment, things that take tens of billions of dollars to make over so long that by the time they're actually in production, we don't need them anymore. And then we're doing things that aren't important, like a lot of our servicemen and women, many of which I'm related to, don't even have the equipment they need or the kind of vest and protection they have to buy it themselves, which is also ridiculous. So, I mean, one of the things, there are lots of different ways we can pay for this. The largest employer on planet Earth, on the entire planet Earth, is the U.S. Department of Defense. Think about that, biggest employer on planet Earth. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about doing for a long time is a version of selective service. It's civil education and deployment where kids that are from like 19 to 23, they can give back to their communities. And they can do it in a bunch of different ways. They can do AmeriCorps, they can do Peace Corps, they can do Meals on Wheels, which is a program that was eviscerated by Trump recently, or they can go into the military or the police force. Now, even with just the amount of extra bodies that we're going to have who get this chance, this opportunity to travel, learn other things, we're going to have a lot more investment in wars because everyone's going to be connected to someone that is actually going to go over there and fight. And I can tell you someone has to deal with that. It's terrifying every time you watch the news. So we get that money back. That's another way we can get some of the money back from the budget without actually cutting our efficiency in any sort of way.
Thank you. Then same question to Antonio Delgado on military spending, cutting or increasing?
Yeah, I think we've certainly begun a trend in the wrong direction on this towards emphasizing militarization at the expense of actually making sure we allocate our resources to prop up our State Department and make sure we do things more from a diplomatic perspective. I mean, we're spending probably, less than 1% right now on actually making sure that our diplomats are properly supported and do the work in a very toxic world that we're living in. A study came out a couple years ago, Pentagon study, that showed that $125 billion, that's how much bureaucratic waste there is right now in the Department of Defense, $125 billion. That is almost a quarter of the budget. And so the fact that we have waste of that magnitude, that is more than how much money we spend in the Department of Education. That's how much waste we have right now. So it is important to be militarily ready, no doubt about it. It's a dangerous world we have to live in, but at the same time, we should be a lot smarter about how we focus on our money and the way we spend that money on futures conflicts, not past-oriented conflicts. We're still putting money in outdated modes of defense. We have cybersecurity issues to be thoughtful about. We have the fact that we're being attacked by Russia, being hacked into our systems. What are we doing to actually make sure that our protections and our defense systems are modernized for this purpose? And ultimately, our strength is in our values, and we got to keep that in mind. It's not in our militarism. It's not in our might. It's in the fact that we are a democracy that stands for rule of law, free speech, free press, and we got to double down on that now more than ever.
Thank you. Congressman John Faso, same question on military spending.
The military spending budget has been under a sequester over the last 8 years, and that sequester has greatly hollowed out our readiness. In fact, just last year, we lost 83 service members in training accidents. That is unheard of. We lost about 23 in military engagements. The notion that our planes can't fly, 40% of our planes cannot fly because of lack of spare parts, that the after-action report of the tragic naval accidents in the Pacific waters near Japan showed that our sailors were not getting enough respite, that our ships were not in port enough for repair and refitting, and that we simply have hollowed out many aspects of our military. Now, there's no doubt that there is waste in the Pentagon, as there is in any government expenditure. And I have supported a full audit of Pentagon spending so that we can get a better handle on how the Defense Department can become more efficient, more businesslike, and more effective at defending us. The price of liberty is not free, and freedom is not free. We have to make sure that we maintain the strongest capacity and that our soldiers and sailors and Marines, our servicemen and women, are best protected when they're well-trained and well-equipped. That's what we're doing. We passed bipartisan legislation for defense authorization and appropriations this year for the first time so quickly in 12 years. So there is a large degree of recognition that we've got to rebuild our defenses, and I support that.
That's time. Thank you, Congressman Faso. Our fourth question is also for me, and it goes to Diane Neal. You are best known as an actor at a time when there is some backlash against celebrity candidates in American politics. You and your opponent, Steve Greenfield, are viewed by some observers of this race as potential spoilers. What specifically makes you qualified to serve in Congress?
This is a really good question. First of all, just in my own industry, there's a distinction between reality entertainers and then actors. One is a skill, one is selling the narrative of your personal life, artificial or otherwise. So it's hard. Real actors are always like, ugh, reality stars. But I'm an accidental actor. I am more than anything, I am a human that loves this planet and has studied everything. And I've gotten the opportunity to live everywhere, experience so many incredible things. And if you're just going by the Constitution, I'm the right age and I live in the right place to run for this office. But more importantly, I love it here. And the interesting thing that people don't understand is, like, when you're an actor, you're a small business. I'm a self-employed, technically, and I have pumped lots of money into the economy. I employ all kinds of other people. You expand. You have to deal with all the things like the double taxation that most people in the gig economy that are self-employed have to deal with, the lack of health insurance, where are you going to get it? These are incredibly important things. And then also, too, because I've had this great opportunity, one random thing about having a broken back is I've gotten to go back to school, and I've gotten to take everything I've ever wanted to take, from national defense strategy and policy, from the Naval War College and Harvard Kennedy School, to environmental sciences, to you name it, anything you could know, things that will help our district, because that's all that really matters, doing what's best for the district. So as far as the spoiler, you know what, our district, the largest voting bloc are unaffiliated voters, so technically I'm not spoiling anything.
Thank you, Diane Neal. Same question, similarly to Steve Greenfield. Excuse me, I'm sorry, it goes to Antonio Delgado, my apologies. What makes you qualified to serve in Congress?
Yes, it's a very important question. I think as I've looked at the trends in D.C. and I look at how we have too many folks in Congress right now who've made a career out of being a politician, and I've kind of lived now in this bubble of divisiveness and partisanship and use it to exploit working families. We need people who have diverse experiences, who have actually not grown up in that political bubble and can bring some different perspectives and have the ability to work across the aisle in a genuine way. Now, my life is a plethora of diverse experiences. I grew up, as I noted, in Schenectady, working class family, went to Colgate, played basketball there, Division I, by the way, upstate New York Basketball Hall of Fame, and was able to then go from there to law school, and then ultimately go off to LA and work in the hip-hop community, then come back and work as a litigator in the commercial space. I have worked with all types of individuals, all types of backgrounds, from different walks of life. And what we need right now more than ever are individuals who have that life experience, who are not career politicians, who are determined to do the work, to be solutions-oriented, to be thoughtful and diligent, and to be basing their conclusions on facts and on science. And that is what I think I can bring to bear now more than ever. And all of that diversity of experience is grounded right here at home. It is grounded in those values that my parents instilled in me when I was coming home as a latchkey kid, and I was told daily, get your homework done before we get home.
Thank you for your answer. Congressman Faso, I'll just kind of tweak the statement for you and say what would make you qualified to continue serving in Congress.
Well, Allison, thank you for that question. I think my record. I've got a record of bipartisanship, ranking 18th out of 435, and I think that's what people want in this very polarized time. My own background, as I mentioned, Mary Frances and I have lived and worked in our community for 35 years. I grew up with a working class family and a household where my dad was a TV repairman and the janitor at the local Catholic school that I went to. We worked hard. I went to SUNY Brockport. I got there and paid for my tuition that first year on the strength of my Regents Scholarship. I went to law school at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. At night, 4 years, 5 nights a week, had to work during the day to pay for it. And so I understand what families go through when they are wondering if they have enough money to pay the bills every month. And that's what my family was when we were growing up. But we were happy, and we all believed in the American dream, and we believed in this country. And that's really what fundamentally motivates me today. I like to be able to solve problems on behalf of people, whether they're farmers in our district, whether they're volunteer fire companies, whether it's the hospital down in Sullivan County that needed the money for a new emergency generator, whether it's a veteran in the capital region who for 17 years was denied his disability benefits he was entitled to. We cut through that and we got him his disability benefits. So I enjoy the opportunity to serve. I'm deeply committed to this Constitution, the rule of law, free speech, the freedom of religion and the American way.
Thank you, Congressman. Steve Greenfield, now the question to you.
Great, thank you. No, I fundamentally do not believe that Congress of the United States is an entry-level position. I appreciate the ability of bringing an outside perspective to something, but that's why I started at school board, and I served 2 terms there. I am not bipartisan, I am nonpartisan. That was the great success of school board activity, is that party affiliation had nothing to do with it. It wasn't even on the ballot. And so that's what I'd like to bring to Congress, but it's really not an entry-level position. You need some experience legislating, researching, speaking to other people, making compromises, and getting that legislation implemented. And so, you know, I've been involved in education issues at the federal level and many other issues, environmental issues, as well as having this experience, and I think that makes me qualified. I do want to speak very aggressively to this issue of spoiling, because it comes up all the time, and I reject it utterly. First of all, the biggest group is not people who are not affiliated with any party. The biggest group is people who don't vote at all. People who don't vote at all in this district outnumber people who do, and either winning party by a 2-to-1 margin. I'm not running as a threat to any major party, but I am running as a threat to war, poverty, climate change, starvation wages, and high taxes. If anyone takes that as a threat to either of the major party candidates, then you need to bring that to those major party candidates and not to me. I'm here to run for Congress.
Thank you.
Our 5th question goes to Antonio Delgado. Anyone paying attention to this race knows that your former career as a hip-hop artist has come under scrutiny, especially in a series of controversial outside ads. Congressman Faso says it's fair game to ask you whether you stand by things you said in those songs. Do you?
No, I do not. I think that the nature of these attacks, they're grotesquely misleading and baseless and divisive at their core. And they speak to a climate right now in our politics that we can no longer tolerate. It gets in the way of solving real issues, whether it's health care, whether it's climate change, whether it's wage stagnation. And it's the reason why so many folks get down about politics. I will say, though, that I'm very happy to have seen so many folks independently come out and take these ads to task, whether it was the 18 clergy members who wrote a letter taking John Faso to task, or whether it was Woodstock Radio who pulled the ads, or one of the ads from their programming, or whether it was reporting from the local papers or the Washington Post who called the ads grossly misleading, or whether it was Dr. Benjamin who called me privately to personally apologize for the inappropriateness of the ads, or Congressman Gibson, who has noted the regretful tone of the ads. I think at some point you have to look for some leadership on this issue. And I would hope that at some point Congressman Faso might find it in himself to denounce these ads, to show that we can rise above this and be better, both as Americans, as fellow citizens, as family men, and people who care about our future. Thank you.
Congressman Faso, are the rap lyrics relevant?
Well, what I've said in this entire process is that since Mr. Delgado just moved into the district, in fact, I think Diane Neal has been here 4 times as long as he has been, we have no basis upon which to judge his words and his actions and his statements. There's no record here. In fact, it's really kind of arrogant when you think about it to move into a district you've never lived in, register to vote, and the very next day sign up to run for Congress. So what I've said about the provocative ads is that they're really in response to the provocative lyrics. And he refuses to justify lyrics that are antagonistic to women, that are antagonistic to the American tradition, antagonistic to local law enforcement. But leave that aside. We've seen enough in this campaign, frankly, to understand that he actually still subscribes to these very radical far-left views about the economy, about how wealth is created in our economy, about what the solutions are to the problems that we face. The solutions to the problems we face don't involve higher taxes. He's against my property tax initiative to end New York's 51-year system of transferring Medicaid costs to the local homeowner. That would save $350 to $550 per year for each homeowner in our district. It would save businesses enormous amount of money. $220 million in our district alone. He's against it. He just doesn't understand what the problems are in upstate New York, why people keep leaving.
Steve Greenfield, Same question. Do you believe Mr. Delgado's rap lyrics are relevant to today's election?
No, I do not, and I really wish that this question were more about whether both of their careers as corporate lawyers were relevant to this election, because I think that's really what we need to be talking about, because that's what each of them would bring to the halls of Congress if they get elected. I've been a musician all my life, and I guess I'm considered non-threatening enough as an electoral force in here that nobody's gone back to examine my recordings, nor do I think there would be any purpose for doing that. But I invite everybody to go do that, because it might actually help my career if that's what we're going to be bringing into the political arena. You know, when I mentioned to my union officers, I'm a union officer myself, and when I mentioned to some higher-ups in my union that one of my opponents worked for Aiken Gump in New York, they gasped. You know, they gasped about the implications of that for labor union people. And I think that's the kind of question we need to be asking Antonio Delgado about. I think we need to be asking Congressman Faso about the corporations that he lobbied for during his lobbying career. But most of all, what's troubling me is this mail I get every day that I can't believe in my mailbox that shows blue-eyed and blonde women clutching their blonde children in dread fear of a black man who's come to their community. A Rhodes Scholar, a Harvard lawyer, and every day my mailbox is filled with things that my teenage daughters have to see about a scary black man who's a threat to blonde women. And I am incensed that my children had to be exposed to this. And I actually asked Congressman Faso to renounce these advertisements right here and right now on television.
I want to caution members of the audience about this. You gave us your word at the beginning that it would be at the beginning and the end. That's where it should stop. Please.
Diane Neal, same question.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with like a rap career. I mean, the truth is everybody on this planet wants to be a musician. Seriously, everybody. Every actor wants to be a rock star. Everyone wants to be something. And you work in the genre in which you are using, right? That's your medium. That's your art. So if Antonio was a country singer, there'd be a lot of pickup trucks and broken hearts. That's the difference, right? So you can't penalize him for that, especially as someone else that works in the creative industry. And it does. It adds, as he was saying earlier, it adds to your experience as a human being. I mean, all of the things add up to your qualifications to make you a more well-rounded person. I mean, I think of all the things that people go after me for. I'm on the board of these giant things. I'm on the board of Waterkeeper for many years and the board of the Urban Arts Partnership where we provide education for 1.2 million city school kids. All these different things, the RFK Center for Human Rights. Those are still more positive, but they add to your experience as a human. And I agree with Steve, though. The thing that is always very bothersome to me is that people think, A, that you need to be a lawyer to be in Congress, that somehow you can only legislate if you're an actual lawyer. That's not true at all. All you need is experience, smarts, and you have to be literate because you need to read information so you can make good decisions for the people. And I am really not okay with more lobbyist lawyers being in Congress. We have enough. Too many advocates for those corporations, those things, the big parties, and not for the people that live here. But as far as the rap, not a problem at all.
Before we go on, I want to award both Antonio Delgado and John Faso an extra 30 seconds in rebuttal to what's gone on here thus far.
Well, I mean, listen, the only thing I would add, lots been said, is nothing in my music, and I want to be clear about this, was denigrating to women. Nothing in my music was denigrating to law enforcement, and I can promise you nothing in my music was anti-American. And I think it's unfortunate that individuals have decided to drip lyrics out of their proper context to feed into divisiveness and hate. But be clear, that is my view. Those are my lyrics in terms of upliftment and empowerment, and I am always going to be standing on what I believe in.
John Faso?
Well, let me be clear as well. Those are not my advertisements. Those are done independently. I have no control, legally or otherwise, over those advertisements. And let me also say this. I would reject the vote of any person who would vote for me because they don't like Mr. Delgado's race or any other reason. Let's vote on the issues, and that's really where I stand. And I just think that at the end of the day, if we want to talk about distortment and ads that are distorting, look at what Nancy Pelosi and Mr. Delgado are putting up against me.
This question goes to John Faso. During the debate over Brett Kavanaugh's Supreme Court nomination, you felt that Dr. Christine Christine Blasey Ford had credibility, but you also said the allegations she made were uncorroborated and, quote, absent contrary proof that there should be no doubt, unquote, that Kavanaugh should be confirmed. Senate Democrats, however, who read the FBI report before the final vote, said it was anything but a comprehensive investigation. Do you stand by your public support for now Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and if so, why?
I do stand by my support for now Justice Kavanaugh, and I think that Senate Democrats did not have clean hands in this process. They had the anonymous letter that came from Dr. Ford for 6 or 7 weeks before they did anything with it, and then they leaked it, and news media sources showed up in her classroom, and that's how her identity became known. That was reprehensible to me. The fact of the matter in this regard is that these were allegations from 36 years ago, and any allegations like this should be taken seriously, and they should be reviewed and looked at, and that's exactly what was done. And what the Democrats did was they turned our concepts of justice on their head. We are not in this country guilty until proven innocent. We are not in this country in the business of condemning someone and convicting someone without corroboration, without real evidence. And we're not in this country abandoning all of our concepts of fairness and rule of law. And that's exactly what they did. They tried to destroy the character and the reputation in a political assassination of Justice Kavanaugh. And it was very apparent when you watched it. Senator Feinstein, Senator Schumer should be the ones to take the heat on this issue, not Dr. Ford, not Justice Kavanaugh, and not anyone else. They manipulated the process, they abused and undermined the rule of law, and unfortunately they undermined the confidence in our courts. And I think it was an outrage, and it remains an outrage in my mind.
Same subject to Steve Greenfield.
Yes, I'm 57 years old, and I've watched a lot of Supreme Court confirmation hearings, and this was the greatest travesty of any of them, among many travesties that have happened in the past. And I have to bring fault to both of the major parties for what happened. First of all, it's important to remember that the allegations that Senator Feinstein had in her portfolio, she had for many, many months, and she waited until the very last second to present them. And the reason for that was that she wasn't simply trying to scuttle the Kavanaugh nomination. She was trying to scuttle it at a time when there wouldn't be time for President Trump to nominate a replacement while the current Senate was still sitting in office. And so she was not acting primarily out of concern for women, but primarily out of concern for blocking a nomination until after January. And I think that was reprehensible because people are playing to their teams instead of playing to the interests of the American people, not to the women that might have been victimized and will continue to be victimized because of what happened during these confirmation hearings. But more importantly, it would always be very challenging to prove something that happened 36 years ago, especially when only the people in the room were the witnesses. I'm much more concerned that the vote went ahead and approved Justice Kavanaugh when he repeatedly lied under oath right now, this month, on television, in the hearing room about things that he had written and was directly lying about his past and his vocabulary under oath. That should have been an immediate disqualifier. And I believe for the first time in history, we have a proven perjurer under oath now sitting in the highest court of the land. And I sure wish some more of the conversation had focused on that.
Thank you.
Diane Neal.
I had a lot more concerns than, what originally came out, like his debt. The FBI, they do background checks and they vet people because of the things that they look for, like drug addiction and debt and gambling debt and affairs, things like that. So people can't be bought and paid for, especially someone that has a lifetime appointment to the court. So, my greatest concern before any of this came out was that, for a couple of baseball tickets, right, he was going to go like, yeah, how do you want me to vote? I mean, that's an exaggeration, but still. As far as the hearings, I was absolutely shamed by both parties and how they behaved. It was an absolute cluster. Poor Dr. Blasey Ford, her worst nightmares came true. Exactly what she predicted was going to come true came true. And at the same time, the Democrats just let it happen, and the Republicans just, instead of letting things work out in a natural way, it became just a display, a sideshow. It was a way for the increased factionalism to just take over everything. And I think that's That's what I am personally fighting against. It doesn't matter who you believe or don't believe. These were people that were victimized. They had a terrible time. And then it was just exacerbated by the partisanship and the factional, where nothing efficient got done, nothing that anyone can believe in got done, and lots of people were hurt. And that's not okay. And that's not the way it should be. And that's not going to end until, again, we start ending this insane factionalism and partisanship that all the founding fathers warned about. That was the thing. They're like, let's not do that, and no foreign money in politics. And yet here we are. Thank you.
Antonio Delgado,
Yes,
same question.
this was a very difficult hearing for the country to endure. You know, and we could have political or ideological differences, and that's why elections do matter. I mean, I was against the confirmation of Kavanaugh before even the allegations came out. He was pre-screened by the Heritage Foundation, which made its, mission clear that it wants to overturn Roe v. Wade. I believe in a woman's right to choose. So just on those grounds alone, I had already had issues. And I'd imagine that because Congressman Faso has said that Roe v. Wade is a black mark on the country, that he might be okay with Justice Kavanaugh being on the bench. And so what I was alarmed by, though, was when Congressman Faso thought that the judge should be confirmed once we all agreed Dr. Ford came forward with credible testimony. And in spite of the fact that his own party had said it was worth a serious and thoughtful FBI investigation, although it wasn't very serious and thoughtful, as we would soon find out, he was already on record saying, confirm him. Before we had any steps forward to do any sort of investigation whatsoever, despite credible testimony that by his own acknowledgement, he said, this was credible testimony. She said, I 100% believe it was him. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say her testimony is credible and then say, confirm him, without any FBI investigation. I personally think that's denigrating to women, if anything is.
Our seventh question goes to Steve Greenfield. What, if any, changes to existing gun laws do you support?
Knew that was coming. My favorite thing that would encompass changes to gun laws is if we would actually treat the Second Amendment the way the Second Amendment is written. I've already expressed how I feel about the explosive financially and physically military budget that we have. If we actually treated our country as a defensive country and actually treated the Second Amendment not only as it's literally written as a sentence, but as Federalist 29, which was written to explain it where it was laid out, then we would actually have none of the problems that a bloated military budget and a global military force creates for us, and we would have all the self-defense that we need. And so we wouldn't even have to have the argument about that. I believe in thinking in terms of public safety. That's the word I use. We have safety management legislation on all forms of consumer products, that it's our legal right to own and operate in the interest of public safety. I don't think anybody that's interested in hunting or home defense needs to have a 70-round magazine. I'd be willing to see that dialed back so that the police could at least have an advantage in trying to take people down that are operating them. I don't think we need weapons of war in individual hands, and I think that that should be scaled back. And I think we need to really stop talking about improving mental health services and actually fund them, build them, and operate them so that people on the ground can do the kind of risk assessment that we do in all other safety situations.
Thank you. Diane Neal, same question.
I'm okay with the Second Amendment. I'm okay with your right to own a gun as long as it does not infringe on my right to be alive. And so that's one of the things I always try and remind my Second Amendment friends. They're single-issue voters, right? Second Amendment's great, but you have to love all the amendments just as much. And one of the things people forget is that it's a well-regulated militia. I mean, the word regulated is in the amendment. But also you get this... What bothers me, again, about the factionalism and the money in politics, things that are coming in from the NRA and other sources, is that people just can't get accurate information. And so many politicians really are getting bought and paid for and have so much money coming in from these other organizations, they can't actually tell you the truth. And so it's disingenuous of liberals to say, like, oh, yeah, if you own a gun, you want your kids shot to death in school. That's not true. Nobody wants that. And if you're from the city, it's totally okay to say, you know what, nothing really good has happened with a gun in the city. It's usually a mugging, a rape, a police shooting. It's something that's not okay. And they're both right. So the thing is, we have to get over this thing where everyone's just like, you want to kill everyone and you're a peacenik, because that's not the way it is. So there are a lot of different things that we can do. And I'm a big fan of registries and universal background checks. It's not prohibitive. It took me 15 minutes when I bought my rifle at Dick's Sporting Goods. That's not that long. I've done a lot of things that took longer. Not prohibitive for something that can kill you. And as well, if you care about law enforcement, you want them to be able to track the guns that are used in crime. So having a registry is absolutely fine. We're registered for all kinds of things. And no one comes away and takes our cars or does this or takes away, well, some take away our voting rights occasionally. But it's okay. We're registered for lots of things. It's not the end of the world. Thank you.
Antonio Delgado, same
Yes,
question.
as a congressman, I would do everything in my power to protect all the rights of my constituents. Those rights certainly include the Second Amendment right. But as I've often noted, no rights are unlimited. You know, you can't yell fire in a movie theater. You can't incite violence. You can't own a fully automatic weapon. And when we are faced with the sort of gun violence epidemic that we are faced with in this country, we've got to take steps to address it. The fact of the matter is we have 8 kids dying a day from gun violence. 17 to 18 teenagers are being hospitalized a day. Women are 5 times more likely to die in a domestic violence dispute when a gun is involved. We see children now walking out of schools because they are so angst-ridden and fearful for their lives in schools. And the answer, to be clear, is not to arm teachers. The answer is to make sure we don't elect individuals who take money from the gun lobbying manufacturing wing of the NRA. Now, 90% of folks, including 73% of NRA members, want universal background checks. 97% of folks said let's ban bump stocks after Vegas. 80% of folks want safe storage laws. More than half the country wants an assault weapons bill. We have a lot of consensus on a lot of issues, but we can't get any traction because we keep electing individuals who take thousands of dollars from the NRA. And I'm sitting next to one of them, Congressman Faso. We have to make sure we draw a line that is stand here on this issue and only elect individuals who are not being compromised by the gun manufacturing lobby. Our children's lives are at stake in this issue. And I know Faso will say, oh, he's against the Second Amendment. Listen, I'm not.
Congressman Faso, same question.
Well, I support the Second Amendment, and I support the Heller decision where the Supreme Court a number of years ago said that the Second Amendment was an individual right. That does not mean that that right is unlimited, obviously, and that's what Justice Scalia said in that decision. Here's what we've done in Congress. We closed the loophole where the Air Force failed to notify the background check system of a dishonorably discharged veteran who was convicted of domestic violence. He then later acquired a firearm and killed over 20 people in a Texas church. We've closed that loophole. The bump stocks are about to be banned through regulation in the administration. The administration is also, for the first time, this was not done under the Obama administration, they are prosecuting people who lie on background check applications. But we should also recognize the fact that the vast majority of the new laws that are being proposed by my opponent would be laws that would affect law-abiding people, people who already, by definition, are obeying the law and who are not committing crimes. The vast majority of people, as he mentioned, who are killed, the young people killed, they're being killed in places like Chicago with illegal handguns. I propose, and my opponent here doesn't apparently support it, mandatory minimum sentence. He's against mandatory minimums. A 5-year mandatory minimum sentence if you commit any crime with a firearm. That is something that would send a message to lawbreakers, but not impose new burdens on people that already obey the law.
Before our next question from Allison Dunn, I just want to remind you, if you're just joining us, that this is the New York 19 Congressional House debate at the Linda on WAMC Northeast Public Radio.
And this is the 8th question, and we'll start with Diane Neal. It is multifaceted, but the same topic. What is your position on immigration? Specifically, do you favor an extension of DACA, and do you favor a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants? Also just wanted to include, how would you handle the influx of immigrants that are moving toward the U.S. border now from Central America?
The caravan. First of all, immigration is a big issue in our district, mostly because we have such a massive agricultural industry, right? So we need a pathway for these workers, whether they're short-term or long-term, to be able to stay legally where they're protected. Because when we're protecting the workers in our district, we're actually protecting the owners of those agriculture companies, those farmers. We're helping them out because they're protected as well. So that's something that's incredibly important to do. As far as DACA kids, I mean, these are the brightest and the best. And they had no choice. I mean, if you've met any of these gangs, they are incredible. And they only make up a small percentage of the illegal immigrants in the country. Now, they put themselves on the line to say, hey, you know what? I'm willing to trust you. I'm willing to register. I'm willing to put myself out there. And we know something, that immigrants in any community, they elevate the communities they're in. And these kids are, again, as the best and the brightest, elevate everything. And as far as the caravan, man, that's a fascinating thing. And my campaign has been operating on two basic tenets, that of empathy and that of reason. And empathy says, okay, we need to talk to them. We need to find out, why are you guys coming here? What are you afraid of? What's going on in your own country? What can we do? And reason says, we can't just allow that many people to arbitrarily show up on our border and just like wave them in without any vetting. So, listening actually on the radio on the way here, interviewing some of the guys in the caravan, they said the aid that the U.S. gives them in their country is actually not being filtered from the government down to them. And that would prevent them from starting this caravan. We can fix that very easily. Go down there, make sure they're getting the supplies, the aid they need that's coming from our country.
Thank you. Antonio Delgado, same question.
Yes, on the migrants from Honduras, I would note that it's important to make sure that we work diplomatically and constructively with our allies, in this case Mexico. They are coming through Mexico, and I think the administration has put us sort of in a complicated perspective or position here by threatening to, send military forces. I would encourage a far more diplomatic, cooperative tenor on a very complicated and difficult situation. On the question of immigration at large, we do have a broken immigration system that needs to be fixed. I am for a clean DACA bill, a clean DREAM Act, untethered to any sort of immigration reform. I do believe that we have to have a real clear path to citizenship, and we should achieve that on a bipartisan basis. But here is the rub. You can't do that on a bipartisan basis when we have individuals in D.C. who fan the flames of xenophobia. And we don't have individuals who take them to task when they do so. When the president decides it's appropriate to separate a child from his parents or her parents, we need our members of Congress to step up and speak loudly against that. The congressman did not. Before the judge, President Trump, issues executive order reuniting families or stopping the policy, the day before, Congressman Faso said, he's kind of right. The legal realities make it such. The day after Donald Trump, our president, decided that it was wrong to separate children from families and their parents, the congressman thought then it was appropriate to say it was morally wrong. That kind of equivocating, that kind of going back and forth is not the kind of moral leadership we need right now.
Thank you. Congressman John Faso?
Well, if you want to seek leadership and a position of leadership, you should be truthful in your answers, and that was simply not truthful. I said right from the get-go that separation of children and their parents at the border was wrong, both morally and it has legal problems as well. Now, the overall immigration system, I've been one of those Republicans that has been fighting to get an immigration reform bill through the Congress. I actually voted for one. Unfortunately, every single Democrat voted against that legislation, which would have fixed DACA, which would have provided border security and done other reforms, including dealt with the issue of separation of children at the border, because the Democrats want the issue. They don't want to solve the problem right now. It is my hope after this election we can actually get some genuine reforms done. Agricultural labor, I'm a co-sponsor of a bipartisan bill that I hope we can pass in the lame duck session of Congress that would normalize the status of up to 3 million agricultural workers in the country. In the Hudson Valley, every farmer, and in the Catskills, every farmer tells you this is one of their biggest issues. Across our district, employers tell you just generally they have jobs, they can't find qualified people to fill the jobs. So we need to fix this immigration system. I am in the forefront of trying to do it, and we also should be honest with our prospective constituents and not misrepresent positions of others.
Now to Steve Greenfield.
Yes, pardon me.
Thanks.
Steve,
Boy, is this ever not a 90-second question, because each component of it, let alone all of them put together. Of course I support DACA. Of course I support Path to Citizenship for the Dreamers. But it's too small and too short-sighted a discussion to allow to stand on its own. I think this conversation needs to be expanded to all of the immigrant workers that are working in this country, because they're all of equal value to this country and its economy. And if you don't think so, just ask any farmer, ask anybody who owns a restaurant, ask anybody who owns a landscaping company, ask anybody who owns a small contractor. When you get work done at your home, when you go buy food at a restaurant, when you go buy food at a supermarket, that food is being kept affordable to you and leaving you with disposable income for other uses, because immigrants are doing that work at incredibly low wages. Okay, as far as the reform that Congressman Faso is talking about, that farmers are hoping for, it includes a ridiculous clause, which is a 45-day period of returning people to their homes while they're in the middle of working. How is that, what does that do to protect our immigration? Everybody here, protect our border, send them back for 45 days, then bring them back again. Who's bearing the cost of that? Why are we doing it? If people are working here, let them have a permanent work visa, and let that permanent work visa be something that can be gradually converted into permanent resident green card status, and then from there into citizenship if they work productively, pay taxes, and live here long enough.
Thank you. Congressman Faso, did you want to rebut that?
Steve misrepresented this position, this situation. We would have a 45-day touchback every 3 years, 45 days over a 3-year period. This is standard immigration practice. Otherwise, we would be setting up parameters for this class of immigrant to legalize themselves that other people who have followed the law do not have to follow. So the 45-day touchback over a 3-year period is not onerous or difficult. They could do it at a consulate in Canada, for instance, to their home country, or go back to their home country. And many of these folks actually do go back.
Thank you.
This is the 9th question. Our question goes to Antonio Delgado. Do you agree with the administration's decision to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem? Why or why not?
No, I do not agree. I mean, the capital of Israel ought to be in Jerusalem, and I think that you know, to get there, we should do it on a multinational basis. I think unilaterally moving in that direction sends the wrong signal to that region. If we're going to be a neutral arbiter and a credible arbiter in resolving what we know is a very intense conflict in the Middle East, we need to act like it, and we need to bring to bear all of our diplomatic tools to do so. You know, my wife is Jewish and my children are Jewish, and this matters a lot. I mean, she's done a lot of work going off to Israel for a number of career paths, and it's become clear to me that, you know, being pro-Israel and being pro-peace is critical, but I'm also pro-democracy. And as currently constructed, you know, Israel is not a Jewish democracy. Those settlements make it so that it can't be. And so we have got to have a two-state solution. And in order to accomplish that, we need to bring a real, incredible, thoughtful, responsible leadership to bear. And I don't know right now that we have that. In fact, I'm pretty confident that that's lacking right now at the highest levels of government. And so from my vantage point, that decision was the wrong one.
Okay, John Faso, your turn.
Israel is not a democracy. Israel is a strong democracy. It is a vibrant democracy. It has got a vibrant free enterprise system. It's got a vibrant agricultural system and culture. Israel is a democracy. They are our main democratic ally in that region. And in fact, moving the embassy to Jerusalem was the right decision. You know, I've had my differences on policy with Donald Trump. I've had my differences sometimes on how he says things and does things. But the fact of the matter is, moving the embassy was the right decision. Congresses for over 20 years have said we pass laws to say that we should move our embassy to Jerusalem. That is the capital of Israel. They are our main ally in the Middle East. We should respect their point of view. And this is a dangerous position that my friend on my right adopts. He supports the Iran deal, which billions of dollars went to the Iranian regime, and they are the main fomenter of dispute and discord and war in that region. They are a threat not only to Lebanon but also to the state of Israel. And so his views on this issue, but I'm astonished. He does not believe Israel is a democracy. Israel is a democracy.
Yeah,
30 seconds, go ahead.
This is a classic example. I said it is not a Jewish democracy, meaning that given the fact that we have settlements currently in the region, it is not, can be deemed a nation of Jewish democracy. And until we deal with the settlements, we're going to have that issue. Obviously, the nation of Israel has always been a beacon of an example of what democracy can be in a very difficult and violent region. And we have always stood with Israel. We were the first to acknowledge and recognize Israel after the war in terms of its sovereignty. So the notion that I would somehow be against this is ridiculous.
Okay, John Faso, take 30.
Well, the fact is, Israeli Arabs are represented in the Knesset. other minorities are represented in that democratic system they have there. Israel is a Jewish state. And to follow the approach that Mr. Delgado wants, it would no longer be a Jewish state. It's a really outrageous misinformation that the gentleman holds, but it shows how dangerous his views are on foreign policy.
You're not making any sense.
Okay, over to Steve Greenfield.
Let's see. You know, this is a question very near and dear to my heart. My wife is the child of 2 Israelis. I have family by marriage in Israel, and I'm raising my children, you know, within the faith, in a secular way, but within the faith, the Jewish American tradition. And so, you know, this question really matters to me. In fact, it matters to me more than ever as I watch people marching down the streets of my own country for the first time in my life, carrying torches and shouting about Jews, and literature that I find distributed in my own community about how Jews are behind every anti-American conspiracy. I'm 57 years old, and for the first time in my life, I have to treat the state of Israel as a place where I and my children may someday have to go. And that's the reason why it was established. That's the reason why it's going to continue to exist. But that having been said, on the question of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, I fundamentally oppose it. I fundamentally oppose the misconception in this country that this was done by Donald Trump, because for months before it was done, Chuck Schumer was in Israel pressuring Donald Trump to make this move. This move was brought about equally by both sides of the mainstream political spectrum, and I am against anything that's of deliberate inflammatory intent, and that's what this is. When the embassy was in Tel Aviv, it was 40 minutes away from the seat of Israeli government, and there was no issue in conducting government transactions from that position. This was a deliberately inflammatory act. I'm against war, the personal and financial cost of it, and it should be reversed.
Thank you. Diane Neal.
That's how I try and explain it to everybody. And I'm half Jewish, and I've been lucky to study over there. It's my mom's side, in case anyone's wondering, so it's the side that counts. And it's a Jewish tradition thing. So even if you want to go skydiving, right, you don't do it without preparation. You don't just, like, jump out of the plane like, wee, because it puts lives at risk. And that's the thing with the embassy. You know, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, it's an inflammatory thing, it's right. And the way it's done so unilaterally, so quickly, without preparation, the problem is it puts everyone's lives at risk, not just Palestinians, but Israeli lives at risk. And it's unnecessarily provocative. And there are a lot of things that can be done to make sure that it could have been done the right way if it's a goal that everybody wanted to have. And Israel, of course, it needs to be protected as a haven. When my grandmother died recently on her deathbed, she said, don't give your children Jewish names. Just because she was still scared. The memory is still there. People still worry about it. There needs to be a safe place. However, exacerbating the violence, exacerbating any kind of fighting between sides for no other reason than you want to look like you have a win, or you're getting money from certain factions, or you're just trying to insert yourself into politics, or you're evangelical who wants to say that, you know, Jesus can come sooner. Whatever the reason, it's not worth putting people's lives at risk now.
Thank you. Next question, our 10th question, goes to Congressman John Faso. On the heels of the GOP-led tax overhaul, which you voted against, the federal deficit is up 17% to $779 billion. That's according to the U.S. Treasury Department. The debt also is growing. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell blames the cost of Social Security and Medicare and says cuts may be in line. In your view, what should the future of Social Security and Medicare be?
Well, it's very clear that we need to make sure that Social Security and Medicare are there for our seniors today, but also tomorrow. And that's why I've supported what Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan did back in the early 80s, which was to create the Greenspan Commission, where they had wise people on both sides of the aisle, actuarial experts, who said, how do we achieve the security of Social Security for the next 50 years? That 50-year period ends in 2034. A mere 16 years from now. And so I've proposed bipartisan legislation that I'm a co-sponsor of that would address this issue in the very same way that Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, along with Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a great New Yorker and a Democrat, supported back then. So it is really critical that we reassure seniors that they will be protected, but also make sure that people who are under 40 know that they will get something from the monies that they're paying into the system. So this is a critical issue for our country. There's no doubt the debt and deficit are troublesome. The debt doubled under the Obama administration, and it is rising now again. And this had been projected a number of years ago. So what the best solution to this is a growing, vibrant economy. That's why 4% economic growth is critical, not the 1% or 1.5% that the Obama administration said was the new normal. Higher growth means better ability to constrain deficits and pay our bills.
Thank you, Congressman. The question now to Steve Greenfield.
You know, this is really one of the most aggravating questions that comes up in the discussion of public administration. I cannot believe that we're even talking about where we could get the money to stabilize the lives of millions of people who are living on under $23,000 a year when we have a $1.5 trillion annual military budget. You know, we would not have questions about what our tax structure and what our debt looks like if we were controlling the places where we spend it, where we don't need to be spending it and where it causes harm to spend it. But more importantly, in terms of this specific question, most people don't know this. I wish I knew why, but another reason why you might want someone with economics training in Congress in just one seat of the 435, which is that the majority of the United States federal debt right now, the Treasury notes that are the form that takes, the majority of it is held by the Social Security system in a completely secure manner. The Social Security system is not under threat. That's where American debt is being held. It's not in China. It's not in Saudi Arabia, like the fearmongers would tell you. It's right here in the United States in our pension systems. And so those systems are safe, and what's happening right now is people are raising fear about Social Security that's not legitimately there because they don't want you looking at the places in the federal budget where trillions of your dollars are being wasted every year. I don't want anybody taking any money away and health care away from people who are living on $23,000 a year. Let's look at the people that are really wasting our funds.
Thank you. Diane Neal, same question.
Yeah, Steve's right about this one. People are always inciting fear, and there are tons of ways in our government that we can reduce spending to actually make sure that anything that we're having a problem with Social Security. But also we have to stop making people afraid. I mean, one of the reasons people that are over a certain age tend to vote the most, right? So if you're scaring them and freaking them out about the thing they're going to lose that's keeping them alive, then of course they're going to turn out and vote for you. But it's sometimes so incredibly disingenuous. But there is a lot of waste in bureaucracies. There's a lot of places things can be streamlined. You know, most of these government departments, they exist. And once they exist, it's in their best interest to keep getting larger and larger and larger and take a bigger share of the budget, whether it's actually efficient, whether it's working for us or not. So a lot of that stuff can go. And also there needs to be a level of financial literacy. Like most people, they don't have the opportunity to invest for themselves. They don't know how to do it. They don't know anything about it. It's a very small amount of the American population that can even put in their own 401ks and stuff to supplement what they've got going on with Social Security. And considering most of my family, my parents are on Social Security, and they also have, you know, Medicare, it's an incredibly important thing to keep going. It is wildly important, but making it efficient, making it streamlined, cutting out the fat, getting rid of the things that don't help anyone, that are just there to help, you know, again, the corporations or the people selling them, the drugs, all the other stuff, that can just go. And that's the best way that you can do it. But again, it's not as under threat as everyone thinks it is. And scaring people just so they turn out to vote is not helpful.
Thank you. Antonio Delgado, same question.
Yes, it's a very important question. The congressman's on record saying that the only issue he has with the tax bill, the only issue he has with the tax bill is the cap on SALT deduction. That is a problem, the tax bill, no doubt. But another big problem, as you ask in your question, is the $1.5 trillion that was added to our deficit. Particularly because that $1.5 trillion was added on the backs of working and middle-class Americans, and particularly because by 2026, over 80% of this tax bill will go to the benefit of the top 1%. So I have a lot of problems with the tax bill, not just the cap, particularly when that same bill is now being used by Congressman Faso and his Republican allies in Congress to cut the programs you're talking about. We're talking $500 billion he just voted for to cut from Medicaid and in essence turn it into a voucher program. That's a vote to cut Medicare. Clear as day, you have to own that. They also cut over $4 billion in Social Security disability insurance. And we know where the congressman is on this issue. He's already made it clear that for him, privatizing Social Security will be a boom for Wall Street. He said this years ago. So we know what the end game here is. Now, Social Security is one of the most successful social insurance programs in the country. People have paid interest. It is an earned benefit, and it ought to be protected appropriately so and not privatized and not used to gut to pay for a giveaway to folks who don't need or big corporations.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the panelists here to keep their answer to the next round of questions to 30 seconds so that we can give you the 2-minute closing statements we promised you at the beginning.
Thanks. Okay, so here's a tough question. Our next question goes to Steve Greenfield. Whom did you vote in the 2016 presidential election and why?
I voted for Jill Stein, and I voted for Jill Stein to register my preference for her policies because I had the good fortune to live in a state where the electoral vote was being determined by 1.5 million votes or more. I have no regrets about that decision. I wish we would abolish the Electoral College so that my vote could finally count.
Okay, and the same question, Diane Neal?
I voted for Hillary Clinton, and I have the interesting fortune to know both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump personally. So I got to make a decision based on knowing them personally. And I always know that Hillary comes across as a little disingenuous just because of being very careful and cautious about her words. We don't agree on a lot of policy. And also Trump, he's an entertainer. A lot of things that people are offended by, it's mostly just him being a showman. And I understand that too, and I understand why people voted for him. But also knowing him well enough, I'm like, I don't know if I want this guy running the ship. So that's who I voted for.
Time.
Yes, I voted for Hillary Clinton. I voted for Hillary Clinton. I thought she had experience, and I thought, her know-how in D.C. Could have been useful, particularly when contrasted against an individual who, separate and apart from the lack of experience, had just made some comments, particularly about women, that I thought were automatically disqualifying. So that alone was sufficient for me. But yes, I voted for Hillary Clinton.
John Faso?
I voted for Gary Johnson.
And why?
22 more seconds. I think that suffices.
It's now time for the closing statements, and in fairness, we'll go in the opposite order here and begin with 2 minutes for Diane Neal.
Thank you. Thank you again. Thanks for everyone for listening and being so good and paying attention today. I know it's not easy, especially when, these are issues that we're so important about. I would like to be our congressman because I am like you. I'm very much like all of you. It's really funny. Sometimes I think about it. Every time I see a woman that has like super fancy nails, I'm like, ooh, she and I have nothing in common. Because I'm always doing the things that we always do around here, whether it's, taking garbage to the transfer station or chopping wood or giving rides to my neighbors or working on my own plumbing, that kind of thing. And most of the candidates agree. They didn't want someone that doesn't represent them. Empathy is one of these things that is really hard to have naturally. Most people don't understand what it's like to live through experiences unless it's happened to them personally. But I understand what it's like personally. Like I said, my parents are on Medicare. My sister is on Medicaid. On October 1st, I've lost my health insurance because of this drunk driver. Now I have a pre-existing condition. It is terrifying to not know. I mean, you can hear, I've got this cough, I've got a cold. I'm like, oh, great. Do I go to the doctor or do I not go to the doctor? And those are the choices that people have to make every day, whether they're going to buy their food or whether they're going to buy their medicine. And so many people, like right now, 40% of the members of the House are lawyers. Super duper. But how many of them don't have health insurance? How many of them struggle? How many of them know what it's like to worry about whether they're going to be able to get an education or help their family or their friends with anything they have? And we have big problems in our district. We have no information infrastructure. We have regular infrastructure projects that we need. Kids can't do their homework. We can't get to places. Farmers can't get their products out. And people can't take advantage of the free market if they can't even have access to it by selling their things online or starting a small business. But we need somebody that is not beholden to the parties. We need somebody that is not paid for, that can go and say, I will do this for you. And in this House that may very well be split. Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Steve Greenfield.
Hi, thanks to everybody for coming down. Thanks for the invitation. It was really great to be here. And we really need more of this, more voices in our democracy and not fewer. So thanks to WAMC for making this possible. I can't believe that I've been through a number of these debates already and we still haven't talked about the drug crisis. Because if we did, I would have had to tell you that none of the treatment modalities we currently use have a recovery rate that's distinguishable from spontaneous remission, and everything we're about to spend on it is going to be completely wasted. I can't believe that we didn't talk about wages, because the wages have remained stagnant in this country since 1973 relative to inflation, no matter which party is in office. And currently, compared to GDP, our wages are back where they were in the 1920s. And there's simply no way to operate a consumer economy with our wages going backwards like that. That is not growth. GDP is an irrelevant statistic to wage earners who are now earning what they got back in the 1920s. The stock market is an irrelevant statistic to people who are now earning relative to GDP what they got into in the 1920s. And it's been a bipartisan effort to make this happen. I wish we talked a little more about poverty and what we need to do about it, because as I mentioned in my opening, if we're not talking about poverty, we're not talking about the cost of poverty, we're not talking about the cost of crime, we're not talking about the cost of education, and more importantly, the cost of lack of education, the crime problem, the expense we pay for it, the prison overcrowding crisis, mass incarceration of people in color, and all coming from communities that are impoverished. We really need to talk about these things because they are all obstacles that are in the way of achieving all the other things that we have been talking about. And all of these obstacles were raised and left unaddressed by both parties. So it's time to let one person into Congress. The other 434 will maintain the status quo for the people that are interested in that. I'll just be one vote. But it's time to get these conversations out onto the floor of Congress, out onto C-SPAN, where everyone can talk about it, where the news will cover it. Thank you very much.
John Faso.
Well, thank you to WAMC and Channel 13 and all of the viewers out there for tuning in. I truly appreciate, and all the listeners of WAMC, Alan, I truly appreciate the opportunity to serve. It has been a great honor for me to serve. I've devoted my life to public service. Mary Frances and I have lived in this community for 35 years. We know what it's like to raise a family. We know what it's like for families to struggle. And I take with me the determination to Congress, if I am reelected, to continue fighting for our farmers, for our veterans, for our seniors, for people all across this district, helping them with the issues that they face, whether it's a veteran needing a disability benefit determination or it's a parent looking for how do they get treatment for their son or daughter who's addicted to opioids. That's why I've translated this concern from our community into action in Washington. As a freshman member of Congress, I was the leader in the House of getting the STOP Act passed, which will stop the flow of fentanyl coming into our country. I've also been a leader fighting on the Agriculture Committee to improve the fortunes of our dairy farmers or organic farmers. I'm proud to have put pieces in the Farm Bill that will protect conservation and our organic farming industry from fraudulent products coming into the United States. And I'm also very concerned about the financial health and stability of our country, and that's why I'm fighting hard to make sure that Medicare and Social Security are there for our seniors, not just today, but for tomorrow. And I'm also going to be very strong on protecting America, making sure we have a vibrant, strong national defense so that America is always protected. This is a great country because its people are good. God bless you, and may God bless America.
Antonio Delgado.
Yes, thank you to WMC for the opportunity. Alan, it's a pleasure always. I grew up listening to you. Jim, grew up watching you. And, you know, it's good to be here. It's good to be home. This matters a lot to me. And it matters a lot to my wife. You know, we both are raising our little boys. They just started kindergarten back in August in Dutchess County. And this place matters a lot to us because it gave us so much when we were growing up here. You know, our families are still here, and what we've witnessed the last 40-some-odd years over the span of our respective lives are trends that are moving away from the kind of families and the kind of communities that we were reared in. And it hurts. It just hurts. And what I have witnessed over the last 40 years are individuals who seem more interested in politics as usual, as opposed to politics for the people. And who seem more determined to just seek the position of power at the expense of the community that they represent. And we can change that now. We can change it because we believe at this point in our country, the trends have gotten too far adrift, where the inequality is so staggering that unless we get some folks in there who have not become fluent in the language of partisanship and divisiveness, who are not career politicians, who don't take corporate PAC money, or who believe Citizens United ought to be overturned, and who believe that the government ought to be for the people and by the people, we're going to keep going down this path. And I know the value of opportunities that I was provided and what that meant for me and for my family, and I take that with me. And I want to serve this community with integrity. I want to serve this community with decency, with respect, with strength, and with love. I will always be straight with you. I will always be accountable to you. I will not hide from you. I will not mislead you. And I will always be with you at every turn. Thank you.
Please hold your applause.
Hold your applause, please. That is all the time we have for today's debate among the candidates for New York's 19th Congressional District. Incumbent Republican John Faso, Democrat Antonio Delgado, Green Party candidate Steve Greenfield, and Independent Diane Neal. The television broadcast of this debate can be seen on WNYT News, Channel 13 at 9:30 a.m. October 27th, the same night at 8 on WNYA My 4. Our panelists have been WAMC's Allison Dunn, Jim Cambrick of WNYT News Channel 13, our partner on today's debate. Election Day is November 6th. I'm Alan Chartock, and you're listening to WAMC.